Imagine standing at the edge of a pit. It's not a large pit, maybe 9 feet across. It looks like an ordinary, hand-dug well, the kind you'd find on any rural property in the Pacific Northwest. You pick up a stone. It's heavy, jagged, and solid. You drop it. You wait for the sound. You wait for the thud of it hitting the bottom or the splash of it hitting water. 1 second passes. 5, 10, 30. There's no sound, just an oppressive, heavy silence that seems to swallow the air around you. This isn't a well. It isn't a mine shaft. And according to the man who once owned it, it isn't even part of our physical reality as we understand it. This is the story of Mel's Hole. It is a tale that began as a local curiosity on a ridge in Washington state and exploded into one of the greatest paranormal mysteries of the digital age. It involves government cover-ups, black beams of darkness, biological anomalies, and a descent into a darkness so deep that light itself seems to die. Today, we're unsealing the files on the hole that has no bottom. Our story begins in the late 1990s on the Manistash Ridge, a rugged, windswept area west of Ellensburg, Washington. A man named Mel Waters had recently purchased a piece of property there. It was a beautiful spot, but it came with a strange amenity. On the edge of his land sat a hole. It had a stone retaining wall built around the top, extending down about 15 feet. Below that, it was just black. Mel's neighbors had known about the hole for decades. In fact, they used it. For as long as anyone could remember, the locals had used the pit as a private landfill. They dumped broken refrigerators, old tires, rusted farm equipment, and bags of trash into it. But Mel noticed something impossible. No matter how much they dumped, the hole never filled up. It didn't even seem to get shallower. Curious, Mel decided to perform a simple test. He shouted into the hole. Usually, when you yell into a deep space, you get an echo. The sound waves bounce off the walls and return to you. But Mel's voice didn't come back. The hole didn't just swallow trash, it swallowed sound. Mel Waters wasn't just a casual observer. He was a man with an obsessive scientific curiosity. He decided he was going to find the bottom. He was a fisherman, so he had miles of high-test fishing line and several heavy-duty reels. He attached a 1-pound lead weight to the end of a line and lowered it. He went through a 5,000-foot spool. Nothing. He tied on another 5,000-foot spool. Still nothing. Mel eventually returned with thousands of yards of line. He sat at the edge of the pit for days, reeling line down into the darkness. He reached 20,000 feet, then 50,000. To put that into perspective, the deepest hole ever dug by man, the Kola Super Deep borehole in Russia, reaches about 40,000 feet. It took the Soviet Union 20 years to dig that deep with massive industrial drills. Mel Waters was surpassing it with a fishing reel in his backyard. When the line finally hit 80,000 feet, over 15 miles deep, the weight still hadn't hit a solid bottom. But something else happened. The line felt different. It felt like it was being pulled, not by gravity, but by something moving down there. The depth was only the beginning of the anomalies. Mel began to notice that the laws of physics seemed to warp around the mouth of the pit. He brought a handheld radio near the edge. Instead of static or local stations, the radio began to play music from the past, orchestral pieces and news broadcasts that hadn't been on the air in decades. But the most disturbing report involved a neighbor's dog. According to the story, a local man's dog had passed away. Distraught and not wanting to bury the animal, the man decided to give it a sky burial by dropping it into the hole. A few days later, that same neighbor was walking near the ridge when he saw his dog. It was alive. It was walking through the brush, wearing the same collar it had been wearing when it died. But the dog wouldn't come to him. It looked at him with eyes that seemed too intelligent. It turned and walked away into the forest, disappearing like a ghost. As Mel began to talk about the hole on the radio, specifically on the legendary late-night show Coast to Coast AM with Art Bell, the world started to listen. And so did the government. One morning, Mel was blocked from entering his own property by men in suits and military fatigues. They told him the area had been cordoned off due to a crashed satellite. Mel knew it was a lie. He saw trucks, carrying high-end geological equipment and black box technology toward the site. Then came the offer. Mel was told that the government wanted to lease his land. They offered him a staggering amount of money, enough to leave and never come back. The condition was simple. He had to move to Australia and never speak of the hole again. Mel took the money, but the mystery didn't end in Washington. Years later, Mel resurfaced. He hadn't stayed in Australia. He had returned to the States, and he claimed he had found another one. This second hole was located in Nevada, on land owned by a group of Native American basters. This hole was different. It had a metal cap on it, which the locals called the whistle. They told Mel that at certain times of the year, the hole would scream. Mel was allowed to perform a new experiment here. He didn't use fishing line this time. He used a biological sample. He lowered a crate containing a live sheep into the hole. He wanted to see if the atmosphere at 50,000 feet was survivable. When he reeled the crate back up, the sheep was dead. But it wasn't just dead, it was cooked from the inside out. And when they performed an autopsy on the animal, they found something that defies biological explanation. Inside the sheep's body was a seal-like creature, a translucent, multi-limbed organism that looked like a fetus, but with human-like eyes. The creature reportedly looked at Mel with an expression of profound sadness before it crawled back toward the hole and threw itself into the abyss. Perhaps the most visually stunning claim Mel made involved the black beam. During a certain celestial alignment, Mel and several witnesses claimed to see a pillar of solid darkness erupt from the hole. It wasn't a shadow. It was a beam of light that was anti-light. It shot miles into the atmosphere, visible only because it blocked out the stars behind it. It didn't make a sound. It just stood there, a column of void connecting the deep earth to the deep sky. Researchers believe this might be evidence of a vortex or a wormhole. If the hole isn't just a physical space, but a tear in the fabric of space-time, it would explain the radio signals from the past and the resurrection of the dead dog. The hole isn't a destination, it's a doorway. As the story of Mel's hole grew into a legend, people started looking for proof. Investigative journalists and amateur hole hunters flocked to Ellensburg. They searched every inch of Manistash Ridge, but they hit a wall. There are no property records for a Mel Waters in Kittitas County during that time. There are no records of a land lease to the government. Skeptics argue that Mel Waters was a character, a brilliant storyteller who used the medium of talk radio to create a modern myth. However, locals in the area tell a different story. They speak of Sector 5, zones that are still patrolled by private security. They speak of hikers who find themselves relocated by mysterious guards when they get too close to certain coordinates. The government may have erased the paperwork, but they couldn't erase the memory of the ridge. From a scientific standpoint, Mel's hole shouldn't exist. At 15 miles deep, the heat and pressure of the Earth's crust would cause any hole to collapse in on itself. The walls would turn to liquid, unless the walls weren't made of rock. If the hole is an artificial structure, a hyper-deep conduit built by a pre-cataclysmic civilization, it would explain why the fishing line never hit a bottom. It might be a ventilation shaft for a massive, subterranean world, similar to the ones described in the S4 and Dark Pyramid files. If the Earth is indeed hollow or contains massive, pressurized voids, then Mel's hole is simply one of the few straws poking through the surface. Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "If you gaze long into an abyss, the abyss also gazes into you." Mel Waters gazed into the abyss for years. He lost his property, his privacy, and eventually his place in history. Whether he was a whistleblower exposing a geological miracle or a storyteller crafting a masterpiece, the legacy of the hole remains. It reminds us that for all our satellites and sensors, there are still places on this planet that are not surveyed. There are still shadows that don't belong to the sun. And somewhere on a ridge in Washington, there's a mouth in the earth that is still waiting for the next stone to be dropped and for the silence that follows. Until next time, keep your feet on the ground, but never stop wondering what's beneath them. If you enjoyed this story, help us by hitting that like button and subscribe to Unsealed Mysteries for more thrilling stories. Until next time.